There was a man whose words carry more weight in military circles than almost anyone alive today. A retired four-star general, a man who has advised presidents, commanded armies, and spent his entire life studying how wars are won and lost. His name is Jack Keane. And 2 days ago, he sat in front of a camera and said something that stopped the entire conversation about this war cold. He said that seizing Karg Island would be checkmate for the Iranian regime. Checkmate. Not a setback, not a blow. Checkmate. The word you use in chess when the game is over, when there is no move left, when the king has nowhere to go, and the only thing left to do is tip it over and accept defeat. Those are not the words of a politician looking for applause. Those are the words of a man who has spent decades understanding exactly what it takes to break the will and the capability of an enemy. And when Jack Keane uses the word checkmate, the people in the Pentagon, in the White House, in military commands around the world, they listen. Here is why those words matter so much right now. Karg Island, that tiny 5-mile stretch of coral in the Persian Gulf, handles 90% of every barrel of oil Iran sells to the world. 90%. It represents 50% of Iran's entire government budget, 60% of all government revenue, and it is not just important to Iran, it is Iran's economic heartbeat. Without it, the regime cannot pay its military, cannot pay its government workers, cannot fund the proxies it has been using to project power across the Middle East for decades. General Keane said it plainly, if America takes that island, occupies it, blockades it, controls it, then America owns all of Iran's major assets simultaneously. The war does not just continue at that point. The war ends because a regime that cannot fund itself cannot survive. This is the most important military analysis you will hear about this war. Stay right here and subscribe to this channel because what General Keane laid out piece by piece is a roadmap that America may already be following. And you need to understand every single step of it. To understand why Jack Keane's assessment carries the weight that it does, it is important to understand who Jack Keane actually is. This is not a television commentator who studied maps from a comfortable distance. This is a man who served 37 years in the United States Army, who rose to become Vice Chief of Staff, the second highest military position in the entire American Army, who served in Vietnam, who commanded troops in combat, who sat in the rooms where the most consequential military decisions of the last half-century were made and debated. When the Iraq War was going badly in 2006 and the entire Washington establishment was calling for withdrawal, it was Jack Keane who walked into the White House and told President Bush that the strategy was wrong and needed to change. It was Keane who championed the surge, the increase in troops, and the change in tactics that turned the tide of that war. History proved him right when almost everyone else in that building was pointing toward the exit. That is the man who just said checkmate. And what makes his analysis of Karg Island so striking is not just the boldness of the conclusion, it is the precision of the reasoning behind it. Keane did not wave his hands and speak in generals. He went specific. He talked numbers, he talked percentages, he talked about exactly what the loss of Karg Island would mean to the Iranian government's ability to function on a day-to-day basis. 50% of the entire Iranian government budget comes from the oil that flows through Karg Island. Think about what that means in practical terms. Every soldier in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard who gets paid that money flows from Karg. Every proxy militia that Iran funds in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, that funding flows from Karg. Every nuclear scientist, every missile engineer, every intelligence operative that the regime depends on to project power and maintain control, their salaries, their facilities, their programs, all of it is downstream of that single island. Keane's argument is devastatingly simple. You do not need to defeat Iran militarily. In the traditional sense, you do not need to occupy Tehran. You do not need to destroy every missile battery and every military base across the country. Of 90 million people, you need to take one island, control one island, and the entire financial architecture that holds the regime together begins to collapse under its own weight. That is what checkmate means, and that is why those words landed the way they did. Here is where the analysis gets even more striking. Jack Keane did not just say that seizing Karg Island would hurt Iran, he said it would end the regime's ability to function. And then he went one step further. He said, America already has the military capability to do it. Right now, with the forces already positioned in the region, the United States Navy has carrier strike groups in the Persian Gulf and the surrounding waters. American air power has already demonstrated its reach by striking more than 90 targets on Karg Island in a single operation. The military infrastructure to execute a seizure or a sustained blockade of that island is not theoretical. It is already there, already deployed, already within striking distance. That changes the conversation completely, because there is a significant difference between a military option that exists on paper and a military option that is ready to execute within hours. Keane was not describing a future capability. He was describing a present one. And the fact that he chose to describe it publicly on television, in plain language, in the middle of an active conflict, is itself a message directed not just at the American public, but at Tehran. Iran's leadership understands military analysis. They watch, they listen, they study every word spoken by men like Jack Keane. And hearing a former Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army describe the seizure of their economic heartbeat as both achievable and decisive, that lands differently than a political speech. That lands as a warning from someone who knows exactly what. The question now is whether Washington is listening as closely as Tehran is. The Iranian regime has survived a lot. That part must be said honestly and clearly. 40 years of American sanctions, a brutal 8-year war with Iraq that killed hundreds of thousands of Iranians, internal protests that shook the foundations of the government multiple times, assassinations of top generals and nuclear scientists, cyber attacks on its most sensitive facilities, maximum pressure campaigns designed specifically to collapse its economy, and yet the regime is still there, still functioning, still projecting power across the Middle East through its network of proxies and allies, still building missiles, still enriching uranium, still standing. So when Jack Keane says checkmate, the natural question that serious analysts are asking is this: has Iran not survived every checkmate attempt before? What makes this one different? Keane's answer to that question is the most important part of his entire argument. And it comes down to one word: simultaneity. Every previous pressure campaign against Iran targeted one thing at a time. Sanctions targeted the economy but left the military intact. Strikes on nuclear facilities damaged the program but left the oil flowing. Assassinations removed individuals but left the institution standing. Iran was always able to absorb the blow in one area because the other areas remained functional enough to keep the regime breathing. What Keane is describing is different. Control Karg Island, and you do not damage one part of the machine. You remove the fuel that powers every part of the machine simultaneously. The military, the proxies, the nuclear program, the government bureaucracy, the internal security forces that keep the population under control, everything that keeps the regime alive draws from the same financial well. And that well is Karg Island. Drain the well completely, and every part of the machine stops at the same time. There is no area left intact to absorb the blow. No financial reserve large enough to compensate for the permanent loss of 90% of oil export capacity. No workaround, no survival mechanism, no path forward that does not require the regime to fundamentally change what it is and what it does. That is what makes this moment different from every previous confrontation. That is why Keane used the word he used, and that is why the conversation happening in Washington right now, behind the closed doors of the most important rooms in the most powerful government on earth, is more serious than anything that has been discussed publicly so far. The option is on the table. The capability is in place. And a 4-star general just told the world exactly how it ends. And the question that remains, the one that history will ultimately answer, is whether America has the will to follow the logic all the way to its conclusion. Military capability and political will are two completely different things. America has the capability. Jack Keane made that clear. The forces are positioned. The strikes have already demonstrated the reach. The roadmap exists, and it has been drawn by one of the most credible military minds of this generation. But taking Cargill and truly seizing it, holding it, controlling it as a strategic asset in an active war is a decision of enormous consequence. It is not a strike that ends in a press release and a return to base. It is an occupation, a sustained military presence on Iranian sovereign territory, a commitment that once made cannot be quietly walked back. A line that once crossed changes the nature of this conflict. Permanently and completely, the world would react. Not just Iran, China, which depends on Iranian oil, would react forcefully. Russia would react, and the United Nations would convene emergency sessions. Allies who have been quietly supportive of American strikes would face enormous domestic pressure to publicly distance themselves from an occupation. The political and diplomatic cost of that decision would be staggering. And yet, the alternative is a prolonged conflict with no clear endpoint, a block strait that keeps punishing the global economy, an Iranian regime that has survived every previous pressure campaign and is already signaling that it intends to survive this one too. A war that drags on month after month with no checkmate in sight. Jack Keane laid out a path that ends the game. A hard path, a costly path, a path with consequences that extend far beyond the Persian Gulf, but a path that ends it. Whether the men sitting in those rooms in Washington have the clarity to see it and the courage to walk it, that is the question this war will answer. And the answer is coming sooner than most people realize. This channel will be here. When it does, every development, every decision, every turn. Subscribe and stay close because the most important chapters of this story are still ahead.